Marx really stood for the emancipation of the oppressed people and revolution overall. I personally see us going that way through the use of standpoint epistemology. Do you think that's a fair critique? Like, standpoint epistemology is working to usher in some form of societal revolution of those who are considered oppressed?
Well, that's the vision. Well, that's the vision. And classical Marxism predicted that the workers would rise up against the owners and engage in a revolution. And then there would be something called the dictatorship of the proletariat. And eventually, the division of labor would go away. And to use Engels' phrase, the state would wither away. One of the stupidest things ever said in the history of philosophy. That after the Marxist revolution, no private property, no profit motive, no exploitation, no need for the division of labor, which is just intrinsic to culture, and the state will wither away. There'll be no classes at all. Well, Marxist predictions have failed completely. The revolutions that occurred in Russia and China didn't go according to the Marxist framework, the Marxist anticipation at all. They were not really led by the proletariat, and they certainly did not bring emancipation to the masses. It's been estimated that in the 20th century, Marxist governments were responsible for about 100 million deaths of their own citizens. Mao Zedong, perhaps 60 or 70 million people of his own people were executed by the state. For what? For being counter-revolutionary. And tens of millions were killed and imprisoned in the USSR. And of course, there's been oppression in Cuba and today in North Korea. Marxism does not bring liberation. And so in the 20s and 30s, these German intellectuals, part of the Frankfurt School, realized that things are really not going the way they should go. In fact, America should have been the place where the revolution occurred because it was capitalism, it had private property, the profit motive. And so Marx expected and wanted revolution to happen in America and in Europe, and it didn't. And so these intellectuals, instead of junking Marxism, which they should have done, they said, well, let's kind of refine this. Maybe people don't know how oppressed they are. We have to tell people they're really oppressed. And the culture oppresses them. It's not just economics, it's the features of culture, like the arts and architecture. Everything is just set up to oppress people. So we need to tell people that they're oppressed, and they're also oppressed if they're a sexual minority, if they're a racial minority, and so on. And so the idea was, we still need a revolution, but we have to convince the oppressed that they are truly oppressed so they will revolt. And the revolt doesn't have to be necessarily a violent one. It can be a cultural takeover.
Yes.
So there was a thinker, an Italian Marxist named Gramsci, and he talked about this idea of bringing the revolution to the culture, one institution at a time. Now, he didn't come up with this phrase, but it's very much a Gramscian idea, is the idea of the long march through the institutions. So look at the 1960s and the kind of student activism, riots in the streets. Well, eventually that calmed down, although there was still a lot of bombing and riots in the 70s, especially with Black Power groups like the Black Panthers and others. But what happened with a lot of those students? A lot of them went into government, into education. And so those Marxist and neo-Marxist ideas begin to infiltrate education, politics, media, and everything else. So it's like this long march through the institutions. And here we are with the riots of 2020 and the kind of critical race theory ideology that we face from the top down at the Biden administration. We face it in state educational institutions and so on.